So we've been doing this series called Life-Giving Sayings of Jesus, and this week we are using this phrase from this scripture that says, "You give them something to eat," which I guess maybe sounds more like a task than a life-giving statement, but the truth is, you got to have food. You have to have food to live. So when Jesus says, "Give them something to eat," it's generally a life-giving statement for that. The problem with this is that I had a lot of questions about this, and I couldn't figure out which one to talk about today. So I'm going to give them all to you. We'll see how many of these we can get through, but these are the questions or statements that I wanted to deal with today, and I'll let you pick which ones we deal with. So who's got the first one they want to choose here from the list? What is it, Alana? You have got to be kidding me. All right. This is actually kind of off the subject a little bit from the main thrust of the story, but if you remember, the story begins like this. Jesus has been working with the people. They've been following him around. He's been busy doing that. Every day there are more and more people with more and more demands and needs and wants, and eventually he and his disciples are exhausted, and he says to his disciples, "Let's take a break. We'll get in the boat. We'll sail to the other side of the lake. We'll go over there. We'll get some rest." So they get in the boat. They sail to the other side of the lake, and the people on the shore figure out what they're doing and run around the end of the lake so that when Jesus gets off the boat on the other side, there they are, all of them waiting for them. It reminded me of Jimmy Towson. Anybody know Jimmy Towson? He was the kid that lived a couple of doors down from me that always wanted my time and attention, and one day I got up early on a Saturday morning and I came down to the kitchen where my mom was ironing some clothes, and he was already there before breakfast knocking on our back door. And I was exasperated, and I slammed my hand down on the ironing board, right on a needle that went right through, came out the other side. So I learned my lesson about exasperation. What did Jesus say when he got off the boat and there they were? "Are you kidding me? I just left to get some rest and you followed me along the lake? Seriously? What is it with you people?" He didn't say that. He felt sorry for the people and started teaching them many things. How many of you would have been more like me? Exasperated? Yeah, we get that way. Jesus had the time, and that's really one of the life-giving truths about Jesus, is he found the strength to give people what they needed. Okay, Eleanor, thank you for your choice. Got another one, someone? Yes, Linda? Where do you think it went? Yeah. Let's hold on to that one. I'll come back to it, though, I promise, all right? Somebody else. Yes, John. What's with the numbers? I'm not sure I have the answer for this either. This is the only story of miracles that Jesus did that is in all four Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell the story of this feeding of this large crowd of people, and they all mention the exact same numbers. They all mention 5,000 people, 2 fish, 5 loaves of bread, and 12 baskets left over. So you got 2, 5, 12, 5,000. Linda?
5,000 people, 5,000 men.
Okay. Right, and one of the versions says 5,000 men plus women and children, right. So we don't know how many it was, but 5,000 is the number that's mentioned. And what's the significance of these numbers? Why is it so important that these numbers be put in there? Now, 5 is a frequent number for human beings to use because it's easy to figure, right? You got a hand. I don't right now, but and 12 and 7 were spiritually significant numbers for the people. 2, I don't know where the 2 comes from, but 2 plus 5 is 7. You know why these are in there like this? The writer is saying to you, this is what actually happened. This really happened. This is why we know we want to put these numbers in here to say this is what really happened. So I think that's the significance of it, but I'm not sure about that one anyhow, and I don't have anything more profound to say about that one. So somebody pick another one. Did anybody bring a knife? Now, here's the interesting thing I noticed from this story. They're out there with the crowd of people. Would you have expected the disciples to pack along enough food for 5,000 people? Of course not, you wouldn't have. But do you realize that they managed to go off without even enough food for themselves? Think about this. When Jesus says, go see how much food we've got, they've got 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, which they now have to divide somehow into 13 pieces, which is why they need a knife, I think. The disciples, I want you to hear this. The disciples were aware that they didn't even have enough food for themselves. They didn't have enough for themselves, which may have been the reason they went to Jesus and said, send these people away so they can go get some food, because they themselves were getting hungry and knew they didn't have enough. They already knew that the side of the lake they were on didn't have any stores. The Walmart was on the other side of the shore, and they had to get in the boat and go back over there to get any food if they had the money to get it with. They didn't have enough for themselves. Do you hear what I'm saying to you? They didn't have enough for themselves, and yet somehow they had enough for everybody. Do we have enough for ourselves here in this church? Are we disciples prepared with enough just for ourselves? And yet somehow we need to feed everybody? Anybody feel a little overwhelmed by that? How are we going to divide it all up? We'll figure that out. But that's the message of this story, that Christ was in the little that they had, and it became plenty. Something else, another one. Yes, Rose. I'm sorry I can't help you. How many times a day do you have to say that to someone? I'm sorry, I can't help you. How many times a week do you have to say that to someone? How many here have to say that to someone regularly because of the way your life is? I'm sorry, I can't help you. Yeah. Lynette's raising her hand up here. I think a lot of us know what that is. And the reality is we've all had to say that to someone or at one time or another. How do you like it? Lynette, how does that feel to you? Yeah, it feels bad, doesn't it? We get requests at the church here all the time for assistance. I would say in the average week, 3 people call us for financial assistance or some other kind of assistance. And we do a lot. Lee, we do a lot, don't we? Yeah, we give out away a lot. We do a lot, and yet the need is not met. And almost every week, somebody asks for an amount of money for assistance that I can't help them with. And it's usually, I have to have my electricity turned back on, or we can't pay the heat bill, or we just don't have enough food for this week, or something happened to, my assistance was cut and I don't have enough. And they ask for sums of money that I don't have. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't know how Jesus felt about it, but he didn't say it very often. I'm sorry, I can't help you. It may be that the point of this story is that maybe we have more resources to deal with than we think we do. The disciples could have gone to the hungry people instead and said, look, this little bit here, that's all we've got. I'm sorry, I can't help you. But they went to Jesus with it instead, and they found help. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with that story, because sometimes it feels unrealistic, and other times it feels like that we ought to be able to find a way. We ought to be able to find a way to help when help is needed. But sometimes we can't. And that's just, I guess I'm just going to leave it at this. That's a hard place when we have to come to it sometimes. And it's one of the troubles for us who are living by faith, to come to that point where we can't help anymore. But we do. We come to that point. Just maybe we don't come to it as often as we think we do. How about a different one? Bread in the desert, again. How many times does the story of somebody getting fed in the desert occur in the Bible? What do you know about Elisha? Did you know that there's a story in the Bible where Elisha is out in the desert with a group of people and they're all hungry and there's 100 of them and he feeds them with one piece of bread? The bread somehow manages to feed everybody. Did you know that story's in the Bible? How many of you know that when the Israelites were in the wilderness, out in the desert, having escaped from slavery, they had nothing to eat and bread was provided for them? What was it called? Manna. You know that story. So the idea that God would provide food for people who are lost in the desert is part of the biblical tradition. When Jesus did this, the people that were there would have totally gotten the message. Oh, Elisha did that. Moses did that. Jesus did that. That this part of the life that we're living must be part of that whole story of God's love for the people. Because God has done this in the past and is doing it now, it will happen in the future again. The message of this story is that this is what Jesus was doing was part of God's whole plan all along to care for the people like this. It's not something new. It's something that's connected to what came before. I want to come back to Linda's question. Where do you think this went? What do you think? Tell me what you think the effect on the disciples was when this happened. What do you think it did to them? When and how it happens, the Bible gives us no clue. We got a little bit of food, now we got food for everybody, now we got 12 baskets left over. Doesn't say how that happened, but let's say it happens. What effect does this have on the disciples? Pardon? Overwhelming, certainly. Overwhelming. What else might have been their reaction? Awe? Maybe fear? And later on in their life, what a leap of faith. Deeper faith. Deeper faith to take a leap of faith. That sounds like a TV evangelist sermon title, but maybe so. Maybe this was something that encouraged their faith enough that they were able to go back to it and say, well, we don't have enough, but there was this time when Jesus took what little there was and made it enough. It must have affected them. So, the last one. What's the message for us today? How is this a life-giving statement of Jesus? You give them something to eat. How wouldn't you have preferred it if Jesus looked up at you and said, here's something to eat? But what he said to his disciples was, you give them something to eat. Which means that there's an obligation to it. Jesus has asked us to do this, to give something to eat. And if so, how does that make you feel? How many of you are a little bit anxious by the idea that Jesus might look at you and say, well, you give them something to eat? Yeah, makes you nervous, doesn't it? But what about this idea? That Christ makes us people who have something to give. If we can become people who have something to give to others, that's life. That makes us alive. We feel at our best already, don't we? When we are able to provide someone's needs. How many of you are the kind of people who just love it when you set some food down on the table and the person sitting there goes, oh, that looks great? You know? You know what I'm talking about, right? We are people who have something to give. That's what Jesus' statement is. We are people who have something to give to someone else. You give them something to eat means you've got something to give. And what do you have to give? What do you today, sitting here, right here and now, what do you have to give? How many of you are prepared to give $5,000 to pay off the new furnace? How about $5? I can get more of those. Okay. Well, $5 is a lot like 5 loaves of bread. So, anyhow, I'm not asking you to do that. I'm not asking that question right now. I just want to remind you that you have something to give. And so, to that end, I want you to do some homework. I have 2 homework assignments for you, and next week, I'm going to ask you how it went when you do these. Are you ready? First, share a meal. You provide some food for somebody else. You can make it, you can take them to a restaurant, you can do it however you want to do it, but you give food to someone else this week. And that means you. That means not just John when he makes a delicious meal, but it means you, Lynette, you have to give something to someone too, okay? Ray, you got that? Chandler? How many of you can do this? You give someone to eat. No, let me make that this way. I don't want to say you give someone something to eat. That's what I'm after, okay? Can you do that? And see what happens. Just see what happens. Number 2, give $1 to that guy on the corner. How many of you are going to get the opportunity? How many this week are going to drive past somebody who's looking for money on the street? How many of you are going to have that happen to you? All right, give them $1. Don't ask any questions. Don't come back to me and ask any questions. I just want you to give them $1. And if you aren't the person that can do that, I want you to give somebody else $1 or $5. Somehow, some way, somewhere, I want you to do that. Pay for somebody else's coffee at Starbucks or whatever you do, which will actually cost you a little more than $1. But I want you to give something. And if you don't have the opportunity to give somebody $1, then give somebody 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Give somebody 10 minutes. Time when you will just sit and just listen to them, or walk with them, or take them somewhere. How many of you can do this? Can you give somebody $1 or something? How many of you can do that? All right. I want you to do that this week. I'm going to ask you next week happens, because what I believe is this, that $1, that time, that word, or that meal that you give to someone else will be blessed by Christ, and it will become a lot more than you think it will be. So let's try it this week and see what happens. Next week we'll take time to talk about it. Are you with me? Amen. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, we invite you to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, beginning at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please take a moment to explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day, and that God's blessings will rest upon you now and always. See you next week.